also, I would like to thank Dr. Oliver King for inviting me to this meeting with a lot of panelists who are believers. I'm involved with the current UN Food System Summit preparation, which in trying to defend indigenous food systems. And to say the least, it is quite challenging. And following the lines of what our chairperson has said, I would like to start by highlighting and reminding us that indigenous peoples have a sacred relationship with nature. And therefore, biodiversity is very important for us. The indigenous peoples of Eastern Polynesia bury the placenta of their newborn at the base of a fruit tree so that the substance that nourishes the fetus nourishes the tree. The Khasis of Northeast India and the Karens of Northern Thailand have similar traditions. This relationship is important to recognize because it has given indigenous peoples what I think Dr. Vincent had highlighted, the values and the cultural heritage of caring, of sharing, and of consensus building. It has given them the wisdom, what Buddha once said, of walking softly upon this earth. And they have meticulously internalized these values in their food and well-being systems. As Dr. Nair said, it's therefore not a surprise that indigenous peoples today preserve 80% of the remaining biodiversity of the world. Studies that FAO and McGill University have undertaken have also shown that these food systems are in fact productive, equitable, and sustainable, and in some areas may have already achieved zero hunger for some indigenous communities. A few months ago, during the COVID period, the Indigenous Partnership that I lead and NESFAS in Shillong, in collaboration with FAO, studied the prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity in 18 indigenous peoples' villages in Northeast India, using FAO's food insecurity experience scale. The study showed that the severe food insecurity is virtually non-existent in these 18 villages, while moderate food insecurity in 2020 was experienced at 11.3% against a South Asia level of 43.8% and the global level of around 30%. This is an example of how local biodiversity resources of indigenous peoples, of wild plants and trees that Vincent had mentioned, have been able to uphold the food security of all. Northeast India represents one of the 12 mega biodiversity regions of the world, and 50% of the biodiversity of India is to be found in this area. We also conducted a mapping of agrobiodiversity and dietary diversity in 32 villages across Meghalaya and Nagaland. We found that on an average, one village has about 20 food plants, including crop varieties, mushrooms, and condiments. A few villages reach even more than 100. We also conducted dietary diversity surveys and found that only 36% of the respondents consume a diverse diet. That means eating 5 food groups out of 10, a formula used by FAO, indicating much more work has to be done to be able to link nutrition, health, and the environment in local practices that are even rich in biodiversity. Interestingly, the most underconsumed food crops were dairy, 0, nuts and seeds, 8%, eggs, 13%, and other fruits, 25%, while we found that fruit trees was the most diverse category of food plants. One village had even 30 to 40 food plants. TIP has therefore been, the Indigenous Party has therefore been promoting an intercultural approach to knowledge and education, where traditional ecological knowledge and contemporary science are treated as equal partners. Three sets of activities undertaken by NESFAS exemplify this approach. The first is agro-biodiversity walks. We've been conducting food festivals and agro-biodiversity walks where young people, elders, and some botany students walk through local landscapes to identify wild edibles, forgotten fruit trees and nuts, trees of importance for food production and pollination in Swindon fields. These walks end up with a nearby sacred forest where a meal is prepared out of the wild edibles, and we invite chefs to help people to re-identify their own culinary methods and to glamorize their food with their resources. This has been a very popular activity amongst the young. The second activity that we have been undertaking are the agroecology learning centers, where custodian farmers propose solutions to solve the problems that's plaguing the local farmers in terms of pests, seeds, oil. These solutions are often derived from local traditional systems. Scientific trials are then designed for judging the efficacy of the solutions. Upon the successful completion of the assessment, the lessons are shared with the community who then integrate them into their local practice. The third one are the school gardens, as many of you have also mentioned, but we use them to promote them as open air classrooms where students are imparted intercultural knowledge and where they get their first knowledge of activities such as pollination, food gathering, and food production. Very often, young people are taught that food is only produced, but amongst indigenous communities, we don't produce food, we also generate food within our Swindon fields. Indigenous peoples within mainstream narratives are treated as vulnerable. Wherever you go, you'll always hear of indigenous peoples that they are vulnerable. They are not vulnerable, but they are pushed into situations of vulnerability. And I think this is an important aspect to be recognized as we highlight the issue of biodiversity. Our equitable land and food systems are constantly being bombarded with patriarchal values and narratives that lack empathy and care for nature or for people. We are being developed by economic systems that are driven essentially by domination, by competition, and by profit. Our equitable food systems are being disturbed by modern day scramble for lands, for extractive industries, for hydro projects, and industrial agriculture, particularly in many countries with no formal recognition of collective rights and tenure, leading many to forced migration, displacement, loss of biodiversity, and unfortunately, militarization of indigenous territories. The United Nations is frantically looking for game-changing solutions, and people like me have been involved to see how to boost nature-positive and nutrient-rich production. But I'm not convinced by the work they do. They can look inside and see there are existing game-changing solutions, and that's why on my screen we have that indigenous food system are themselves game changers, but not too many people are willing to listen. And that's the problem that we have. But indigenous people also in today, they need funding, they need capacity building, and they need strategic alliance and champions. On their own, they cannot defend their biodiversity on their own, they cannot continue. They need innovations to sustainably tap on the bewildering biodiversity of their nutrition rich whole grains, legumes, and nuts. They need encouragement to domesticate their wild edibles, to get healthy proteins and micronutrients, as been mentioned, and to convert their backyard gardens into home pharmacies. Indigenous youth need unique institutional support to play the role that they can effectively play, to broaden their ecological knowledge, to have the ability to connect that with contemporary science, to have enhanced their global leadership, and so that they can connect to previously disconnected indigenous leaders and people and non-indigenous change makers, such as the MSSRF. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of the work. Thank you.
Thank you.